now my mind is blown. No surprise, guess I should have known. Oh, my mind, now my mind is blown. No surprise, guess I should have known. You got control of me, break my barricades. Walls are crumbling, grounds they shake. You came to save, but it's way too late. Every single time you stay, I cave. You got control of me, break my
Hello and welcome to another episode of Neurodivergent News, where we are really aiming to help you find the resources that you need to live in a neurotypical world. I am Deanna Brakefield, your host and owner of Lionheart Kingdom Marketing. I am a mom of 7 beautiful babies, as many of you know, 6 of which are already diagnosed. I am also a neurodivergent business owner. So, I have been previewed to some of the more unusual sides of running a business, especially when you are neurodivergent. Today with me, I have the wonderful Celestina. I have had the pleasure of getting to know her in our pre-interview, and her take on relationships and parenting styles is just absolutely phenomenal. Celestina, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, will you pronounce your last name for everyone, just in case when they see it in print, they go, "What?"
So my name is Celestina Brozek-Wild, and it's okay to mispronounce it. I don't get mad about it.
You don't seem to get mad about very much. You're very laid back, very relaxed from what I've seen. It's been refreshing.
Oh, thank you. That is the exact opposite of what someone told me yesterday.
Really?
I will take it.
Well, it's a win for today. So tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah. So I am a trauma-informed, dual certified relationship and parenting coach. Um, I got into this work partly because of my own experience working with a coach. It was one of those things where, not to discount therapy, but I'd been through a whole slew of therapists, and this was the person that was finally able to move the needle for me. I'm also a late diagnosed autistic, and it was only through having my kids that I decided that I needed to look into this and pieces began to click into place. And so I have 2 kiddos, one of whom is ADHD, so autistic and ADHD. Um, and I was just reflecting this morning on how I could finally say that I have a dull life, which I think to a lot of people, that's the antithesis of what they want. They want like excitement and adventure. But I feel like I've come from a history that felt like moving from one crisis to another. And so, with that context, having like a chill, simple life, it feels like a success. Um, and I was just reflecting too that what felt like a crisis in the past with the tools that I have now might not have been quite the crisis. So that was just interesting to think about.
No, you're right. It is. We live in a world where, we have lots and lots of late diagnosed people in our generation. We have the children underneath us where it seems like 1 in 3 of them has a diagnosis these days, and none of us are given the tools. We're expected to conform, we're expected to do things the way that a neurotypical does. And so it does create crisis situations.
Yeah. Yeah. That's another thing I was thinking about. Just like, where is the tipping point where we're like, oh my gosh, a considerable amount of the population is neurodivergent. So therefore, maybe we need to like adjust the systems and structures, like maybe neurotypicals are no longer like the massive majority that we thought that they were.
I think you're right. So you talk about maintaining your calm and your peaceful place. How do you manage that? Because I know we discussed your two kiddos, and you've got the one that's divergent, and then you've got the one that is typical. And I can't. I mean, I can just imagine the friction.
Yeah, it's yes and no. I really think it's possible to get to a place, I mean, this is what I specialize in with my clients, where even if there's two very different neurotypes or two very different lifestyles or sets of values, like it is possible to be in a relationship that feels peaceful, that feels authentic, that feels generative. But it does come down to I think it comes down to tolerating difference, and I think, we really tend to feel threatened by difference, and so that tends to activate our nervous system, and then things go downhill from there. So, really, the first step and this is actually I don't know if I mentioned to you, I do use astrology and human design in my work, which is, like, a little bit, woo, but I have found it to be incredibly powerful and helpful in helping people be okay with difference. Like it's this weird, like third party authority where all of a sudden, like if you hear it from astrology, it's just it's very like unshaming. It like brings the charge down around difference. It's really pretty remarkable how that happens. And then from that place, like when we're actually able to be okay with someone else's difference or with our own kind of perceived um difference that like we're uncomfortable with or we shame ourselves for or we wish we could be different to fit in better. And that's a whole other conversation, like the difference between fitting in and actually belonging. Um, but that's a very long-winded answer. And I would say taking the charge and taking the threat out of difference goes a long way. And then the second piece, and obviously this depends on your kids' like developmental level and age and all sorts of things, is learning to communicate in a way that is not oppositional. A lot of our communication, very unconsciously, I mean, a lot of what we just consider very normal communication is too quick. Um, so we're not like really listening and we're not really checking in with ourselves and the other person to the degree that would be most productive. And it's also, even though it seems neutral or even though it seems normal, I perceive it to be escalatory versus de-escalatory. Um, so those would be the two things that I would offer as far as why we in our family constellation have, I think, more peace than we would if in a different world or in like in a different circumstance. But
So you mentioned escalatory versus de-escalatory communication. Can you give us an example?
yeah. So even just the simple phrase like it's time to turn screens off now, it feels neutral, right? Like, it's not like you're screaming at your kids, like, "Turn it off now or else." But even that, when you contrast it to something like, "Find a good place to stop," like, I trust you to turn off your screen when you're ready. It's a little bit, like, harsher. Um, it doesn't allow for collaboration.
Hmm.
Um And so again, even though it feels mostly neutral, it doesn't honor the child's agency or their autonomy in a way where something that like and I mean I understand that a lot of times with this type of scripting or this type of languaging, it can be really frustrating, it can feel really awkward, it can feel really convoluted, it can be hard to like move, when you're like stressed out and your brain is fried, like the last thing you want to be doing is like really being conscious and like checking your language. But um yeah, that's one example. And another like I'll just go deeper because my work is built on the principles of nonviolent communication. So if people are interested in doing a deeper dive, I actually have like a little mini course. It's only $8 that kind of goes over everything. Um, but also you can just research nonviolent communication, which my work is based on. But the idea is that no matter what anyone is saying and no matter how they're saying it, what you're listening for, kind of both in your own language, but also in what your kid is either saying or doing, because a lot of times children communicate through behavior, not through language.
Right.
You're looking for a feeling and a need, like an unmet need that is connected to that feeling. So, um, that can also be a way to shift from language that's very oppositional to language that is more like open, more curious, more collaborative. Because as a parent, if you're like, put your shoes on, we're running late, that has a very different tone and comes off very differently than like, like I really value being on time. It's really important to me to be on time. And can I, please request that you put your shoes on now? Or, like I'm feeling worried that we're going to be late. And if you can communicate your feelings and your needs, people are much more receptive to that than just having like you shout what you need them to do at them, or not even shouting, but just if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's not necessarily shouting, but it's an excessive amount of urgency in what you're saying.
Yeah, it can be excessive amounts of urgency. It can also just be like, hey, I've already come up with the strategy to like get what I want and you have no say in it. Instead of like, hey, this is what I'm feeling, this is the need that I have. Like, do you have any ideas for how you could support me? And a lot of times neurodivergent kids have some kind of like PDA or DMDD, something going on where they're particularly sensitive to like demands or like opposition or power struggles. A lot of times our neurodivergent kids have especially high autonomy needs. So this particular skill, this particular way of learning how to communicate can really go a long way, can really, really go a long way.
I can absolutely see the benefits with talking with an older child and using that communication style. What recommendations would you have for a younger child that is less verbal and more emotional and body language based?
So with a younger child, I would say the important thing is to model, and you can also sort of guess. You can kind of guess what they're wanting to communicate, and then you can check in with them, where the only thing you're requiring from that child is like a confirmation or a negation. So it can look like, um, it looks to me like the reason you hit your brother was because you got really upset because he knocked over your blocks and you have a need for your play area to be kept safe. Did I get that right? And then your younger child who maybe is pre-verbal or nonverbal, all they have to do is like give you some kind of body language that's affirming, or disconfirming. So that can be one way to do it, where you're essentially speaking for your child, but not in a way where you're speaking over them. Like you're always checking with them. Like, did I get that right? Is there more? Do I need to keep digging? Um, so in that way, it's a dialogue. And then also modeling for them, like, it can feel the two things that I would model are it can feel very vulnerable and very awkward to try to even it's actually really interesting when you start trying to speak in this language because you realize that you're jumping to the solution without actually being super clear on what you're feeling and what your need is. So a lot of times, even for me as someone who does this work, when I try to communicate in feeling and need language, I'll realize that I'm like actually kind of unclear on what I'm feeling. And I'm actually kind of unclear like what the need is connected to it. But an example that I use with like, for example, my kids are picky eaters. Instead of being like, like you have to take 2 bites of this food, or you have to clean your plate before, or you don't get screens, whatever it is. I would communicate it with like, hey, I'm feeling really worried because I really value, your physical safety. And one thing that can make us unsafe is, when we're deficient in certain nutrients that can affect our health. Um, and the other thing, that I have a real desire to do is to like go out and see the world and eat at restaurants and visit different places. And so if you guys are really uncomfortable with a bunch of different foods, to me, it can feel like scary or hard to take you to a restaurant, or I can feel a little bit scared because I don't know if you're getting enough like nutrients. And so when I phrase it that way, my kids are actually much more open to trying foods that are unfamiliar to them. Because I've made myself vulnerable. And I think there is actually a real relational alchemy that happens when we're willing to make ourselves vulnerable. Um,
So, what tips would you give? Would you talking neurotypical or neurodivergent parents to achieving that style of communication? Because I know for neurodivergence, we tend to be very analytical and have a hard time verbalizing what our actual feelings and emotions are.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely something to practice. And I would say, you know, it's okay if you mess up. It's okay if you decide it's not for you. Like it's not the end all and it's not the be all. I think with neurodivergent families and individuals, it can be a little bit of a shame-based thing to be like, yo, this technique. And then you're like, well, I don't get it or it doesn't work for me.
Mm.
And then again, it's like, oh, I'm deficient, like I'm defective, I'm the problem. Like this technique is saving people's lives, but for some reason I couldn't get it to work. So it is hard sometimes or for neurodivergent people, I think we experience the external world differently, but we also experience our internal world differently. So I think just being honest with who you are and how you work. I think even if this whole like, okay, what's my feeling, what's my need feels like a little too like convoluted or like, that I feel like that's not something that I want to do. I would say just getting really good at noticing your internal experience
Hmm.
and sharing that if it feels like safe. Like, so, and how that's going to look might vary from person to person, but I think that's really kind of underneath the technique that I'm sharing is like, because a lot of times we just move through the world, like I said, without like, we're like 5 steps ahead, like we haven't really taken our time with like, okay, what do I actually need in this moment? How do I actually feel in this moment? Like, what actually is the problem that I'm trying to solve? And so taking that like pause in that moment just to check in with like, am I like running to reassure my kid, but I've actually had a really hard day and I've only had 2 hours of sleep. And like, I at least need to have the information that I'm pretty under resourced going into this encounter, trying to resource someone else. Even that can actually increase our capacity just to have that compassionate awareness of like, oh, you probably need some reassurance too. And instead, here you are, like going to reassure this little human. Like just that amount of like compassion for ourselves can really help increase our capacity to be present with our kid. So,
Can I ask your personal opinion on something?
oh yeah,
So I know a lot of psychologists today are talking about essentially not laying our emotions on our kids, that they're underdeveloped and they're not prepared to deal with adult emotions. How do you safely communicate how you're feeling without making it your child's responsibility?
well, I think it's really interesting to make the connection that just because you're expressing an emotion, it's someone's responsibility. Um, I I could talk about this at length, and I'm trying to figure out how to make this short. I think there's a lot of toxicity in our culture around emotionality. I think for one, th- it's weird to assume that just because like you're expressing or sharing an emotion, all of a sudden someone else has to feel responsible for it. Yes, that's kind of what we do. We do that in our partnerships and even the languaging we use. Like we'll be talking to our partner, you made me mad.
Hmm.
No one makes anyone mad, they might, have an action or a behavior that stimulates the feeling of anger inside you. But like, make no mistake, your body is what's creating your emotional experience. It's your system. Um, and even this idea that like as parents, we're somehow responsible for our children's emotions. To me, that's weird. To me, that's actually we're not in our lane if we think that we can manage our children's emotional experience or that we should manage our children's emotional experience. There's also this idea like our children's emotions different than adult emotions. I don't believe so. I think emotions are universal to all humans regardless of age. So to me, there's this kind of weird childism or ageism that's kind of concealed in that I would want to kind of pick apart a little bit more. And then the last thing I'll say is emotions are only scary if you're getting the wrong messaging around them or if you don't have the tools or the reassurance or the regulation to process them. And I think in this culture, we actually have been falsely conditioned into a very flatline aspect. I actually think in this culture, we repress our emotions all the time. And because of that, we give off this idea that humans are actually way less emotional than what is actually healthy to be. I think if we had different conditioning and different protocols, like if it was actually abundantly clear that like no one else is responsible for your emotions, then like even just with that kind of explicit understanding, it already feels safer if anyone is emoting because like it's not up to you to fix it or do anything about it. If we had the explicit rule that like if someone is emoting, it might actually be really big. Like, they might be raising their voice, they might be stomping around, but like you're not actually in any danger because they know to draw the line at like physical aggression, then like it would be okay. You would let them scream, you would let them stomp because you would know that you were safe. You weren't responsible and you were safe. So if we can create these types of structures and like rules with our families and with our children, I think it's better for everyone. I think actually the most dangerous thing is to emotionally suppress around your child because that actually leaks out. And then your child is experiencing like a dissonance. Like mommy's words are saying she's calm, but that's not actually the energy I'm getting from her. And that's scary. I think it's actually much better to be like honest and transparent and congruent with your emotions in front of your child.
So do you think it's acceptable to if you do have a child that's stomping and screaming and it's very obvious to you what they're feeling, to verbally reprimand the behavior while validating the emotion itself?
I think yes and no. I think it's okay to validate the emotion, but I think it's also important to have an awareness of how emotions work. Um, because a lot of times I think this is where we get stuck, right? Like like it's okay to feel angry, but it's not okay to hit. Okay, well then like what am I supposed to do with my anger? How am I supposed to feel my anger? Like anger is very much oftentimes a discharge emotion. And I think we have to be honest with that. It's something that we do want to like discharge in like a very physical way sometimes.
Mhm.
And if we can say, whatever, like so the stomping and the screaming is interesting, actually. I would say, like, if a child is like physically hurting themselves or others or property, that's where I would redirect. I would say, listen, it's okay to feel angry. This behavior is not appropriate. Try these things. But in my like, try these things bucket, I would include stomping and screaming because even though that's like energetically maybe disturbing, it's not harmful in the same way that like physical harm is.
Mhm.
And what else am I going to tell my kid to do with their anger? Like how else are they going to discharge it? Um we n- there's a line between suppression, repression, or sublimation where we are actually not allowing the emotion to metabolize, and that we have to I will say culturally, collectively, we're very unskillful around this. No one has taught us. And so there is no like official opinion on where that line is. And so we are kind of like, it's uncomfortable because we're all trying to figure this out and we're kind of the first generation to figure it out. So we don't know like what's right and what's wrong. But it's also very interesting to then kind of take a look at this situation and be like, oh, wow, like we're so dependent on external authorities to tell us what's right and what's wrong. This is really interesting. Like, why can't I have authority around this? Like, why can't I decide for myself and examine for myself why I think this is right and this is wrong, or why I think this is where I'm going to draw the line, or why I think like this behavior actually allows for metabolization of this emotion, in a healthy way, whereas this behavior just sublimates it. And it's hard. This is all stuff that we have to do for ourselves, by ourselves. And this is why I have the work that I do and the clients that I do, because it's also okay. It's very okay to need support around this, but it's not something that we can completely outsource, I believe.
Mhm.
It's also not something that I think we should completely outsource. We should do our research. We should listen to a variety of experts. And then we should really just take some time to see how that's landing in our system and like what we're drawn to and why. And then kind of implement our own, and be willing to update what we're implementing, right? Like if we decide that the way that we want our kid to discharge anger is by drawing, great, like try it. If it works, amazing. If it doesn't work, then like no pun intended, but it's time to go back to the drawing board and to be like, okay, like I thought that was a solution. My kid is kind of showing me that it's not ideal. So I get to try again and I should try again.
So it sounds like you're saying everybody's normal and everybody's safe. It's just a little bit different from everyone else's.
That's very true. Everyone's normal and everyone's safe is a little bit different. And because of that, it is incumbent upon every individual, every parent, every family to become very conscious of what their normal is and what their safe is and why. And a lot of times when we're doing that analysis and that examination work, we will find places we've been conditioned. We will find places where we think we're unsafe, but it turns out we're just uncomfortable. We will find places where our idea of safety is different than our child's idea of safety, and we need to like stretch.
Mhm.
And so in that analysis work, you're doing it right if your ideas of normal and if your ideas of safe actually begin to shift.
Okay, I love that. Your messaging is so clear and it's so calm and well delivered. I've just loved everything you've said today. We are almost out of time though, and I would love to hear a little bit about your one on one coaching and the exciting resources that you're putting together for supporting parents in their relationships.
Thank you. Yes. What do I want to share? So, I do offer one-on-one coaching. I offer it for parents or for relationships or for co-parenting. It's really interesting. To me, now these days, everything feels like a relationship, like your relationship to yourself, even. Um, so that is available. I also do want to say a lot of times people immediately discount coaching because they're like, well, it's not as effective as therapy, slash, it's really expensive. I have had numerous clients tell me that my work has been more helpful than therapy. Um, I think that's, for a lot of different reasons, but I think I'm not coasting, like I'm always learning. I'm always taking trainings and stuff. And also, as far as expensiveness goes, I offer sliding scale and accessible pricing. So that can sometimes feel like close to a copay, it can feel like it's almost like this is the same that I would be paying if this was therapy that was covered by insurance. So I just want people to know that like if they think that's an obstacle, it may not be. Um, and not just for myself, like this, I think other coaches are doing accessible pricing and stuff now as well. So, um, As far as resources goes, I have 2 courses. One of them I mentioned before, the compassionate communication course, which is only an hour long. It's a mini course, it's super fast, but it does kind of offer that structure, that process that I was alluding to earlier, where you shift your languaging into like feelings and needs translations. Um, the second course I have is called Decoding Misbehavior. That's also a communication course. It's a little bit different though. It teaches you how to take like actual behavior and figure out what is underlying it and work with it like as constructively as possible. I think a lot of times we see a misbehavior and we're just like, oh, we need to correct it. Like there needs to be consequences. And that's the level that we remain on. And honestly, I think that just creates more opposition and more mistrust and more relational rupture over the long term. So this course, it's still a mini course. I think it's 2.5 hours long, so not too bad. But it really teaches you how to like go underneath and look at the root cause and to work with it constructively in a way where you're not having to rely on consequences or yelling or just like throwing your hands up in the air, like, I don't know what to do with this kid, you know?
Mhm.
Mm. So
Well,
those, yeah, the 2 courses I would point people to if they're interested in working with me that way.
well, it has been a pleasure being with you today. I've really enjoyed our talk, and there's been some really constructive information that has been shared with the audience. I'd like to thank you for your time today because I know you're a busy lady. Is there any last remarks that you have for our audience?
Um, just if I send you my website, we can put it in the show notes so people know where to find me. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, cool. Last remarks? I don't think so. This has been really wonderful. Thank you for listening and for having me on.
You're welcome, and you are welcome back anytime. It has been a pleasure. This has been another episode of Neurodivergent News. Thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you again. Have a blessed and wonderful day.
Take control of me.